You won't find many people who ever want to visit Moldova on holiday. Habitually listed as the poorest country in Europe, other than its small wine industry, it's not known for anything, either good or bad. Even business people haven't really bothered trying to tap into any kind of natural resource. I'm one of those weirdos who likes that though. I visited the capital, Chisinau, in 2013, and my time there was interesting. The first problem I had was looking for literature about the country. Back then, there were no guidebooks that I could find, neither in Waterstones nor on Amazon, though that has changed. There was only two examples in literature. One was Playing the Moldovans at Tennis, the classic travelogue by British comedian Tony Hawks. No, not him. Him. The other was one chapter in The Red Quest, an interesting self-published travel story by Jason Smart. I decided to go there because I wanted to do a 2-week train journey across Romania, Bulgaria and Serbia, and it made sense to start in Moldova. Even with my adventurous travel ideas, there was pretty much no chance of me going there for a weekend away or any other reason. Without much information, I found a hostel in the city centre, booked my flights, and headed off. My first impression came upon landing. The airport looked pretty run down at the time, with a few abandoned planes dotted around the perimeter, slowly rusting and disintegrating. Getting a taxi was a bit of an adventure too, with a small crowd of drivers crowding around me, looking at Google Maps on my phone, but eventually I found a driver and headed off. When we arrived at my hostel, I felt like I had been left at some sort of shack in the middle of nowhere. At no point did it feel like I'd been through a major city, but I was in the right place, and it turned out I was the only guest staying in what was basically someone's house, with a couple of converted rooms. It only took a couple of corners for me to be in the thick of the action. I quickly found myself in Cathedral Park, dominated by the Metropolitan Cathedral of Christ Nativity and the Triumphal Arch. It wasn't easy to enjoy these landmarks though, as around the park and in the main street the crowds were out and milling about. Turned out there was a national wine festival going on, many stores offering up little tasters to whet the locals' appetite. I'm not a wine fan, but I tried some. I have no idea if it was any good, but I'm sure there were a few gems in the mix. There were a lot of people dotted around selling what must have been homemade honey, or whatever the proper word for making honey is. That was probably the most interesting aspect of my stay there. Chisinau may be the capital of a European nation of 2.5 million people, but it's not the centre of anything much beyond general economic and political activity. This was an outpost of the Soviet Union, an afterthought that looked towards its western neighbour more than its eastern overlords. Back in 2013, it was still in flux. Its political system was just about chugging along, but economically it wasn't doing too much. Development in the city looked patchy, with the odd new shopping mall and modern office building breaking up the monotony of Soviet palatial dominance and brutalist concrete eyesores, some of which looking like they'd been abandoned years ago and completely forgotten about. Some heritage had been preserved, and hopefully that continues to be the case. Culture was certainly something that enough people in the city cared about, but it was far from being anything to write home about either. There's the aforementioned Metropolitan Cathedral of Christ Nativity and the Triumphal Arch, which commemorates the defeat of the Ottomans by the Russian Empire. Like any good capital, the nation's history is told in the National Museum of Moldova, and the National Opera and Ballet Theatre provide high cultural entertainment, and more entertainment can be found at the Nicolae Sulac National Palace, the Organ Hall, and the Republican Puppet Theatre. State Circus is still standing, but as far as I can tell, it's still abandoned. For some fresh air and relaxation, there's the Stefan cel Mare Central Park, and other landmarks of note include the Hotel Chisinau, the Presidential Palace, Chisinau City Hall, and Moldovan Parliament. Though I'm sure there are others of note. Poverty was still a big thing. A lot of people near the main trade station setting up a makeshift market to sell what a gump they had to make a few extra bani. No doubt that was what all the honey was for. It's not a city I would recommend, but then again, it's not a city I would dissuade anyone from visiting. I did pretty much all the important stuff in a single day, and there was no metro to get me about. There wasn't any need for it. There weren't even any trams, just trolley buses. There were some pockets of growth and modernity, but it was all very nascent at the time. Looking up the city now, there doesn't seem to have been that much more development since then. There's been at least one major political crisis, and the you-know-what would have hit hard, but it doesn't look like the country is on the verge of collapse either, unless Putin decides Transnistria needs expanding. On the whole, it was definitely worth the money, time and effort to go to Chisinau. I've seen a country that even the more intrepid travellers don't bother to include on their to-do lists. I always felt safe, locals were pretty nice, and that was just about enough to see and do for a couple of days. As a starting point for a larger trip, it did its job pretty well. So if you want to visit a country that's a bit different, has a little bit to offer, it's going to be quite cheap, and it's going to be unique enough for you to show off to your friends, then yes, definitely visit Chisinau in Moldova. It's worth it for a day or two.